You're listening to the 40 Fit Radio podcast, dedicated to the 40-plus community. Join us as we discuss the truth about fitness and health using science, reason, and the experiences of our host and content experts. Welcome to the 40 Fit Nation. Hey, welcome back to the 40 Fit Radio and welcome back to the 40 Fit Nation. And today's episode is about the squat.
The squat.
And last time, if you don't squat, you don't know squat.
That's right.
And if you don't know squat, you probably don't squat. But last episode, we talked about the compound lifts and the general value of all the different compound lifts. So what we're doing in the next several episodes is we're breaking down the different lifts that are the main lifts. We call them the big four lifts of the compound lifts. So those would be the squat, the deadlift, the press, and the bench press.
Yeah, although I think we call them the big three.
Did we call them the big three?
And we said the bench press was kind of an accessory.
Yeah, it is.
But not really.
Yeah, but I like the bench.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I like the bench press.
I mean, nobody says, they should, but nobody says how much you press.
I know,
it's
but
how
they
much
should
you
say
bench.
how much you press.
They should. Well, that's how you know the difference between a lifter and a bro.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? The bro asks how much you bench.
Yeah.
The lifter asks how much you squat.
Yeah, and how much you press and how much you deadlift. And so today we're going to talk about these lifts and how they relate to the 40-plus population. Should you be squatting if you're over the age of 40? I'm sure you'll figure that out real quickly. The answer to that question is yes. But how should you be squatting? What squats are best for our population? And what are some of the important points why we squat and the rationale for using certain types of squats? So today we're going to talk about what I call the mother of all compound lifts, and that is the squat. So one of the reasons why I call the squat the mother of all lifts is because I think it's the most effective at driving human adaptation and change when we're talking about strength out of all the lifts. And the reason why I think it's the most effective, I'm just going to kind of glance over this first, and then we're going to talk more specifically about these areas. But the first reason is that we move the weight the farthest distance. We move loads the farthest distance and out of any of the compound lifts. I mean, there are other lifts that are other types of lifts where we move weight farther, like a snatch.
Right.
A snatch, we move the weight the farthest distance, but we wouldn't consider that a compound lift. That's an Olympic lift. It's a dynamic lift. It's speed-based and dynamic. And so when we're talking about the squat, we're talking about moving. It is the lift out of all the big three that we talked about, or the accessory lift, the bench press. It is the lift where you move the weight through the farthest distance and range of motion. And efficient range of motion. We're going to talk about that, one of those criteria.
Right.
Okay. The second thing that it does is it uses the most amount of joints. As a compound lift, we know that part of the criteria of being a compound lift is it's multi-jointed. Okay. But it uses or recruits or requires you to use the most amount of joints during the lift.
Yeah.
You're using everything. I mean, you're pretty much using everything.
Right. Yeah. So let's think about it from the ground up, right? We've got our ankles are bending a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit.
Yeah.
Our knees are bending for sure. In fact, I think weren't the first squats before they got the term squat, I think they were called deep knee bends, if I remember my barbell history correctly.
Sure.
So we know our knees are bending. Our hips are bending.
Yep.
And we've even got some stuff up top that's bending too.
Yeah, and we're recruiting our spine musculature to use it as a rigid lever. We're also recruiting the musculature in our feet to help us balance and help us, create a base of support. And we're also recruiting the arms to not necessarily hold the bar in place, but to act as kind of a rudder on the bar, for lack of better terms. The arms are there. What really holds the bar on your back is the placement of the bar in where we're going to talk about later. Then you're also using, your upper back musculature. You're using your traps. All of those musculature are being recruited. So because all those musculature are being recruited, and you're using the most amount of joints that you can use in any of the compound lifts, and you're traveling the farthest distance, then that allows us to get you stronger, faster, And I think that makes this lift the mother of all lifts.
Right.
It just is the most powerful of all the lifts. And we're going to talk about some other reasons why. But that's the first reason. That's the main reason why those simple criteria make it the mother of all lifts, if that makes sense. So let's talk about the different types of squats. So in the world of weightlifting or barbell training, we're going to go through these different squats that we can perform. First one is the high bar squat. That is a back squat where the bar is on your back and it is up higher on your back, right on your upper traps. If you had to kind of give it a location for placement, it's on the belly of the upper trap and it sits just below about C7, so the seventh cervical vertebrae, okay? Sits right there at that vertebrae. That is a high bar squat. You squat all the way down till the hip crease. The crease of your hip, which is the apex of your hip, basically, is below the top of your kneecap, and then you stand back up with the weight. So there's a high bar. More of a vertical chest or vertical trunk position, a lot more knee flexion and knees being driven forward and ankle flexion than another type of squat we're going to talk about,
right.
And a more open hip angle. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So let's really quick, let's just kind of lay out some of the terms that I think will be helpful in discussing the various types of squats, right? So you just referred to a few of them. We've got, as we said, compound lifts are multi-joint and multi-segmental. So if we talk about those joints that we have, we've got the ankle joint, we've got the knee joint, and we've got the hip, right? And that's going to form three angles. We really care mostly about the hip angle and the knee angle, so we'll refer to that. And in terms of segments, we've got the back angle, so the torso or the back. We've got the thigh or the femur, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we've got the shank,
right.
the tibia, or your shin.
And we've got the foot,
and
kind of where the bar is going to be placed, basically.
That's right, yeah. So the foot is not going to move in terms of relative to the other joints, but it's important in terms of where the bar is in relation to the foot.
Right.
So when we're talking about these various squat variations, keep those joints and segments in mind, and you can kind of picture them as like a stick figure as you're imagining how angles change between the different squat types.
Yeah, and the other angle that we look at too, one of the other angles is the elbow angle or the upper arm angle. And in a high bar squat, the arm angle is fairly vertical. Okay, but the high bar squat places the bar high. The trunk is more vertical. The knees go into more flexion or bending. The ankles go into more bending, and that is one of the variants of the squat. It's probably the second of these squats that we're going to talk about in regards to moving the most amount of weight. You can move the most amount of weight with what we would call the low bar squat, and that's the next squat. The low bar squat is a squat where the bar placement is different than the high bar squat, and that's the first main difference. And that is the bar sits basically on the posterior deltoid below the spine of your shoulder blade, which is the bony process called the spine of the scapula. And so the bar sits just below that and on top of your shoulder, but it's the back part of your shoulder. So the bar is in a lower position. Some people like to call this the low bar squat. We refer to this as the squat.
Capital S.
That's right, capital S. So we don't necessarily refer to it as the low bar squat. And so several differences between the high bar and the low bar squat are because of the bar placement being lower, it shortens the back lever, okay? We bend over more and our chest is pointing down at the floor along with our gaze. We're looking down at the floor. So nipples down at the floor, chest down at the floor, gaze down at the floor, okay? We're bending over more. We're driving our hips back more. And the result of this kind of movement of the trunk is that when we get to the bottom of the squat, the knees are less flexed or bent. The shank or the tibia, okay, the lower leg is more vertical. It's not vertical, but it's more vertical. And the bar should basically be placed right over the middle of the foot. If we look at the squat from the side, we ought to be able to see that the center axis of the bar, the middle of the bar, is right over the midfoot. And the midfoot is basically just at the top of your laces, right about where your laces would be on a shoe. It's not out towards the forefoot as people would think.
Right. That's the part of the foot you can see. There's more of your foot behind that.
Yeah, exactly.
Than where your ankle is.
Exactly.
So,
so it's right there at the top of the laces, kind of where the laces start on your shoe, maybe a little below that. But the differences between the low bar and the high bar, and this is all up for argument. We believe as starting strength coaches and guys that squat a lot, that this squat will allow us to use physics and human biomechanics better. And because of that, allows us to satisfy three really, really important criteria. And when we talked about the squat being the mother of all lifts, these are the criteria. Number one, what's the first criteria?
Well, we want to move the most weight.
Right. We want to move the most weight. Why do we want to move the most weight?
So we can use the most muscle mass.
That's right. And then that gets us...
We move it over the greatest effective range of motion.
Right.
To get us stronger faster.
Right. That's right. Yeah. So those are the three criteria. Basically, we recruit the most amount of muscle mass in the lift. Number two, we're then able to move the most amount of weight. Okay. Number three, we travel the greatest effective range of motion, and all those things get us stronger faster. And that is the goal of strength training, is to get you stronger faster. You get a better rate of return on your investment of effort and work in doing the squat than you do the high bar squat.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons we like the squat so much out of these different types of squats.
Yeah. So I think that the midfoot position that you pointed out is a really important concept. As we'll get to, it's an important concept when you're actually doing the squat. It's an easy cue to think of once you understand how the midfoot works. But when you're thinking about the kind of the theory of the squat and angles and joint angles, all that kind of stuff, imagine as you have a high bar squat, right? With any amount of weight on the bar, no matter what squat variant you're doing, if the bar is not located over the middle of your foot when you're at depth, you're going to fall over, right? If the bar is an inch in front of your midfoot and you've got an empty bar, maybe that's no big deal, right? But now imagine you have 405 on the bar. Right. Well, you're going to fall over. It's going to pull you forward. Same thing. If it's behind your midfoot, it's going to make you fall backwards, right? So it's just a basic physics that we have to keep the bar centered over the midfoot during the lift. So you can now think of the bar placement and imagine that person squatting with a high bar position on top of their traps. And now as the bar slides down, they have to get more bent over. As you said, the chest goes down, the nipples go down towards the floor, because all that's happening is we're just keeping the bar over the middle of the foot, right? So as the bar goes down, the back angle has to get more and more horizontal, closer to the ground. Yeah. And I mean, our number one goal here is, when we're doing the squat, is to create a balance or equilibrium between the barbell and the lifter. There's a barbell lifter system here that we're trying to create balance with. There's the lifter who's got his body weight or her body weight first, and then we put a load on their back, and they've got to keep that in balance and equilibrium over the center of mass, so that when they're squatting, they're not too far forward in front of the center of mass, and they're not too far behind it either. So I get it that most of you guys out there listening in the audience will not geek out on this stuff like we would, and we could talk for hours about the physics and the biomechanics of this. But at the end of the day, basically, you should squat. And out of these squats that we're going to talk about today, we like, and we'll just tell you right up front as a bias, we like the squat with the bar placed lower because of those three criteria that we talked about. And we believe that, and there are several underlying bullet points that make all three of those criteria true. In other words, that satisfy the data that we need to make those three criteria true. Like the hips go back. We recruit the hamstrings more. We put a greater stretch on the hamstrings. The back angle changes, so we're then able to recruit the low back better. There's less knee flexion driving the knees forward, so we're able to then recruit the leg musculature more equally. There's a lot of reasons why, from a physics and science standpoint, that we like the squat. I'm convinced that most of you guys out there really don't care about that. You want to know, should I squat, and what squat is the best squat to start with? And if I were telling a novice out there that is going to start squatting, I would tell them that the squat is the best of these different squat types or variants to use
And really, for all the way from novice to intermediate, advanced, lifters should be doing this type of lift as their primary lift. Now, there's a lot of discussion and concerns about Olympic weightlifters, and maybe they should front squat more, or they should high bar back squat. We're not going to have that conversation today. Most of you guys are not out there doing competitive Olympic lifting. Most of you guys are ladies out there just want to get stronger. And there's so many benefits to squatting. We're going to talk about those here in just a second. Let's talk about it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So
what were we going to say?
To cap that point off, as my wife likes to say, if you squat and you don't have a booty, this is your chance to get a booty.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you already have a booty, this is how you get the tight booty that you want.
Exactly.
And you want a low bar squat because you're going to work the booty more than any other type of squat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the squat, the squat is the best of all the other squats. Another squat is the overhead squat. The overhead squat, the bar is held in almost like a snatch grip position. The bar is over your head. You can bring it out of a rack, or you could power snatch it, or it's based on how heavy it is. You could push press it. You could push jerk it up overhead. But the bar is overhead. The arms are locked out. The elbows are straight and extended. And you squat down with a very vertical chest, generally speaking, and the bar has to be a little bit behind the ears so that it stays in balance. And again, the bar is over the middle of the foot at the end of the day, or the lift gets bailed. I mean, the lift gets lost. Okay,
right.
But the overhead squat out of the squats is one of the squats that's going to be a weaker squat out of your squat variance, just because the nature of it's got to be held up with the arms. So you can't just put the bar on your back or on the front like you can in the other squat variants. So the overhead squat, what value does the overhead squat have? It's great for Olympic lifters. I guess you could make a discussion or an argument about it being good for balance and handling load overhead. But in relationship to the average individual out there who's just trying to get fit, who's over the age of 40, I don't see the value to the overhead squat.
Right. Yeah. Well, this, I think that's a good example of what we talk about in terms of general versus specific, right? One of the reasons why we like the squat, and we talked about this in the last episode on compound lifts, is that it's a general movement pattern that you do in everyday life. We squat all the time, sitting up out of a chair, you're squatting, right? Getting off the toilet, you're squatting, getting up out of bed, you're squatting.
Right.
So we do a body weight squat all the time. And so a barbell squat approximates what we do in real life a little bit more than an overhead squat. That would be a much more specific movement that's specific to someone that's doing like a snatch, that's an Olympic weightlifter. So we want to train when we're training for strength. We're going for general movement patterns that improve as much of our fitness as we can. Right.
Unless you're going to go to the Bahamas like I did on a cruise and overhead squat your wife overhead, then there's not any significant value.
That's right. Yeah.
But I did do that.
You get some sweet style points for that.
I got pictures of that, man. I got legit pictures. But okay, so that's the overhead squat. Another squat variant would be the front squat. And the front squat, if we're looking at how much load could be lifted, generally speaking, and this is general because segment length, what we call anthropometry in individuals, can change this a little bit. Okay. Right. Generally speaking, the squat where the bar is lower will be your strongest squat. Okay. The high bar squat will be your second strongest squat. And then the front squat would be your third strongest squat. Okay. In the front squat, the difference between that and the back squats that we've talked about already and the overhead squat is that the bar is in front and it's held in what we call the front rack position, which is very similar to when you power clean a bar and you rack the bar in basically your fingertips or the end of your palms on your shoulders with the elbows high and the forearms as horizontal as possible, okay? Horizontal to the floor surface, okay? The front squat, basically the bar is in front, okay, of your back, okay? So you have to be very vertical, again, very vertical, to keep that barbell lifter system and to keep that bar over the middle of the foot as you're going all the way down and coming up. A lot of knee flexion in this squat.
Yeah, the knees go way forward.
Yes, the knees go very far forward in this squat. So I don't recommend someone who has really bad knees to front squat. So the front squat is another variant. You see a lot of Olympic weightlifters front squatting because they have to receive or catch the bar in the bottom of a squat clean during Olympic lifts.
Right.
And it is a front squat out of the bottom. They catch it, boom.
Yeah, they've got to practice
high.
that movement because it's so integral to their competition lift.
Right. But smart Olympic weightlifters, what they'll do is they'll drive their strength with the squat, and then they'll front squat just because it adds specificity to their training, basically, to their specific sport.
Familiar with that specific movement.
Right.
Yeah.
And to develop the quads a little bit more and to make it a little bit more quad dominant.
Yeah. So, this is something I see online all the time is a lot of people are worried about their quads in the squat. And, just in case you were wondering, right, your quads don't just give up when you do a low bar squat.
Right. No, everything's working.
Everything's got to work. So when you think about like what muscles are being used in these lifts, it's easy to think about it as just which muscles move which joints. Right. And when you're talking about the knee joint, there's really only one muscle group that is responsible for extending or standing up out of the bottom of a squat at the knee.
Right.
And that's the quads.
Right.
Whereas the hips have multiple muscle groups, right? We've got our glutes and our hamstrings. Those are the big ones. Some other smaller muscle groups as well. But that's part of the reason why we like the low bar squat or the squat is the fact that we're training more muscle groups because more muscle groups are moving that joint and we're moving the hips more and that. So, but just because of that, your quads are still getting work in the squat. So you don't have to worry about front squatting if you want big banging quads.
Yeah. And all muscle groups in the squats are being utilized. Some are just being used more or less.
Right.
When people think about, some people think that when we're doing endurance training or conditioning, that if you do something really quick, that you're not using the oxidative cycle, or that you're not using the Krebs cycle, or you're only using the glycolytic cycle, or that you're only using sugar versus fat. And everything's working together. Some are more dominant than others in those activities. And the same thing happens with the lifts. Everything's working together. Some musculature are being recruited at a higher level based on physics and based on the science of what is being required in the human movement. Okay, where the bar is placed, where the barbell lifter balance is in the system. And so we're using all the muscles, okay? Some other squat variants would be like Zercher squats. We're not even going to talk about those.
Yeah, don't do those.
No. Split squats, which are basically, it's almost like a lunge. You can do front split squats or front lunge squats, or you can do reverse split squats, Bulgarian squats. There's all these different variants. And then there are what I would consider variants to the squat. And those are different ways that we can perform those squats, okay? So an example would be a box squat. If I want to develop strength out of the bottom, or work on form, if I want to develop pure strength with no bounce out of the bottom, okay? And when I'm talking about bounce, I'm not talking about ass to grass. I'm talking about an artificial boundary or an artificial limit that you hit at the bottom, and you automatically tell your musculature to drive you up with the hips, okay? And so that's hip crease below the top of the knee, all right? That's not hips all the way down and knees fully flexed, so your knees get driven forward at the bottom. That's not good for your knees.
Right,
okay?
right. And I think let's dig into that in a little bit here.
Yeah. And so, but we could do a box squat, which develops strength out of the hole, pure strength out of the hole. It also helps us slow down the lift with a lifter who a pause squat will do the same thing, where we want to work on getting them in the right position at the right time and looking at their form and getting them dialed in on their form. Generally, that squat is done with less load than their traditional plain squat, their basic squat, okay? Because we're working on some of those things, but we're developing characteristics of the lifter that we need and adapting some capacities that we couldn't do with just the regular squat.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. The boxes also can be useful in rehab situations.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got a tweak that's happening. You've got pain that's happening at the bottom of the squat.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can use that box as a tool to use a partial range of motion.
Yeah. And pin squats would be similar. Pause squats would be similar, but those are basically just variants of the main squats.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of a the squat. So one of the other things I want to say about the squat is this. The reason why I like the squat is because how I've experienced the use of the squat in my clinical practice and in real human life. I think out of all the lifts, all the compound lifts, including the deadlift, which I love the deadlift, but out of all the lifts, the squat is the most common human movement, no matter what age, what level of performance, and what activity is being performed. Now, some people would say, well, walking's more common, or well, standing's more common, or sitting's more common. Yeah, but we're not talking about moving loads generally. We're talking about just human movement. But when we're talking about human movement with load, the squat, using the body weight first, and then adding load as needed during daily activities, is the most functional of all movements. There's that word, functional. Okay? So it's the most functional, though. When you think about it, when you get out of bed in the morning, that is a squat. You're standing up from the bedside. When you get off the toilet or sit down on the toilet, that's a squat. Okay? When you get in and out of a car, that's a squat. Okay? If you go to pick up something and you squat down to pick it up, that's a squat. There's a lot of different ways that we squat all throughout the day. Go sit down in a chair at work. That's a squat. Okay? So the squat is really practical in its application. And so training the squat has a very strong functional corollary that the other lifts have a lot of functional corollary. And we'll talk about that when we get to those lifts. But the squat definitely has the most.
Right.
And is the most practical training movement that you can have any population perform. And the reason why I know that is this, not because of all the things I just talked about, but because generally speaking, when someone comes into my practice and they're injured or they're older, they're a geriatric client or they're a senior, and they've got deconditioning syndrome, the weakest thing on them is their squat. If I can drive their squat, then I can improve so many other of the lifts and so many other of the functional movements.
Right, right. I think one aspect of the squat that is, unique to the big lifts, maybe not unique to the big lifts, but is certainly one of the most difficult of the big lifts, is it's difficult to execute correctly. It's a complex movement. There's a lot of joints moving, as we've talked about. The balance component of it is very difficult. It's hard to keep a heavy bar balanced over the middle of your foot.
It requires some reasonable mobility of the joints.
It requires mobility. Yeah. It requires active concentration. Kinesthetic awareness.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on in this movement. I think it's for the average person. I think it's a fairly athletic movement that they may not be doing anywhere else in their life. And I think about there's other
not with load at least.
Not with load.
They're doing it all throughout their life.
They're doing it, yeah, exactly,
Right.
Exactly. But not with load. And so I think the athleticism required to perform a proper squat is kind of under. People don't look at that as much.
Yeah,
They think about the joint angles and the muscles and all that stuff, but it's like there's something to just the athleticism that it builds as well, being able to use your body.
And the beautiful thing about the squat is because it is. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I came in and trained today, and I squat, pressed, and deadlift today. And when I get my squat done of my lifts, now every lifter's a little different, but I'm glad.
Right? Yeah. It's like,
I'm glad. Okay, now I can do the press and my deadlift.
Yes,
and those are not easy necessarily, but to me they're simpler lifts, and they require less, like you said, athleticism. They require less. Full joint mobility of many different joints, multi-jointed joint mobility. And so I think the beautiful thing about the squat is that it's so effective in its ability to do all those things that you just talked about. It requires a large neural recruitment, a very large central nervous system concentration, okay, because of the movement, the balance points, and all those other things, especially for someone who hasn't squatted much and they're learning the movement too.
Right.
So I think the squat just has this great opportunity to impact all these other things. And to most of our listening audience out there, if you're not squatting because you got bad knees, or you got a bad back, or you got this or that, then you just don't get it, because that's the reason this lift was invented. That's one of the reasons this lift is so powerful for you, is that if you can't get out of a chair with reasonable function and you can't do some squatting with load, you have just decreased your quality of life significantly. So the number one thing I do, we go back to this point I made earlier, with all my patients, when they come in, if they have general deconditioning syndrome, if they've got back pain, if they've got hip pain, if they've got knee pain, if they've got balance issues and they're a what we call a neurological client, maybe they got some balance and proprioception and coordination issues. If they're a Parkinson's client, if they're an Alzheimer's client, I have them all squat because it just seems to from an observational and also from a scientific perspective, it has the greatest impact on human function of any of the lifts. So if you don't have the squat as the foundation of your strength program, you're missing the boat. You're missing a huge opportunity to take one lift in your lifestyle. If someone said to me, you can only do one lift for the rest of your life, it would be the squat.
That's right. Yeah.
It would be the
Undoubtedly.
squat. Because, I mean, they did a study, and I need to find this study. I was quoted this study several years back, but they did a study, and they took 20 college football players that were in a D1 football program, and all they did with them for 6 weeks was squat them. Okay, that's all they did was squat them. They squatted 3 days a week, and they just squatted. Before they squatted and put them in the program, they measured their neck size, okay, their chest size, their bicep size, their hip size, and their thigh size. At the end of 6 weeks, they all got obviously stronger, right?
Right.
Guess what grew?
Everything.
Everything grew.
Yeah.
Everything grew.
Right.
Their neck got bigger. Their arms got bigger. Okay. Their hips got bigger. Their chest got bigger. And their thighs got bigger. How's that possible? Because the squat recruits all these musculature. But more importantly than that is what we have to talk about is how does it affect the brain and the neuroendocrine system and the hormone system. And this is perfect for our population of over 40. We want to get our testosterone levels up. We want to get our insulin growth factors level up. We want to get all these healthy hormones that create lean mass that allow us to do and look good and feel younger. Then the squat is probably the best to do all that. And that's why we want to have people squat, and that's why it's so important to squat in your strength program.
That's right. There's one other aspect that I think is equally as important, although it's not a physical aspect of the squat. It's more of a mental aspect of the squat.
Yeah. We haven't even touched the surface on that.
Right. We talk about voluntary hardship a lot, as do our friends at Barbell Logic. And our good friend Hambrick over there at Barbell Logic, he calls the squat the peril simulator. Because the problem with the squat, unlike any of the other lifts, the problem with the squat is you don't know if you can actually do it until you're at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the worst place to be, right? With the deadlift can be crazy heavy. And you know what? If you miss it, you just set it down.
Bar.
You just put it on the ground, right?
Exactly.
Same thing with the press. It just comes down, put it in the rack, right? Even on a bench, if you're smart and you have a spotter or you've got pins, right? It just goes on the pins. No big deal.
But you don't collar the bar.
That's right. And you don't collar the bar, right? But a squat, there's something uniquely terrifying about a squat. I still get butterflies before I squat heavy, even though I've done it.
Too.
Even if it's a weight I've done before, it's just, if it's heavy, that first rep is always got some butterflies going on. And I think there's that aspect of it. And then the other thing that I was saying, that being able to learn that skill of controlling your body under a heavy load when it's hard to do that. When it's heavy, the bar just wants to drive you straight down on the ground. It's hard to think, okay, I got to get my hips back. I got to get back. I'm going to resist this weight. And I'm going to control myself down on the bottom. There's something mentally that does to you. If you can do that, you can handle anything. I
mean, good squatting for the average individual, and I'm talking about an average athlete, good squatting requires tremendous focus. It requires, especially as the load gets crazy heavy, it requires great mental acuity and focus, which our age population can use.
Yes.
It's developing your mind. I can tell you, I told a lifter the other day, I told her, your biggest challenge when the load gets heavy is not that you don't have the strength, it's that you lose mental focus. I see your eyes moving around the room. I see you getting frustrated during the second rep when you're going into your third rep. And I can see that your brain is gone. You've lost your mental focus.
Right.
The lift is done because the physicality is there.
Yes.
The mentality is not.
Right.
And so, the squat has so many things. We've talked about voluntary hardship. We've talked about doing the hard. But when you look at it purely from a physiological standpoint, what does it do to our bodies as older people, as people over the age of 40, okay? What does it do to our bodies? It is the fountain of youth. I really believe that squatting is the best lift to develop a more youthful body. If you got bad knees, you need to use the squat, okay? You don't need to be high bar squatting. You don't need to be front squatting. You need to be using the squat. You may have to start on a leg press, which is a squat variant. It's a machine-driven or a machine-controlled squat. But still, I took a picture of my wife the other day squatting on the leg press. and then turn the picture upright, and
Right.
it looks like the squat.
Yeah, that's how
It looks like the squat.
That's how I tell people how deep to go on the leg press. Is
Yeah.
I turn my head sideways.
Yeah, exactly.
Until I see their hip crease
Right.
below their knee, right? And that's how I tell them how far to go.
That's right.
So that they're doing a squat on the leg press.
That's right. Don't bias yourself as to regards to I got bad knees, I can't squat. Get on a leg press, work with a coach, start there, or start with a really light load on a barbell, and then gradually work your way up and see what happens to your knees. See how they respond, okay? I mean, I always tell my patients, hey, you got a choice. You can be strong and hurt a little, or you can be weak and hurt a lot. And that's definitely true 9 times out of 10. Now, there's some cases where patients' knees are just totally trash. Go get a knee replacement. Go
Right.
get your knees replaced and then go squat.
Yeah, because it's
Okay.
going to happen anyway.
Absolutely. Go squat. I mean, and so that's one of the reasons we love the squat. All of these different reasons about, satisfying the 3 criteria, being the mother of all lifts, more applicable to any and all populations. There's not a single population out there that you cannot apply the squat to as the most functional lift. The young, the middle-aged, or the old all need to squat. So, it has this great functional application, this strong neural recruitment and endocrine response that we get from it. So what it does to our lean mass, okay? And then the things that you talked about, the ability to develop, strength under hardship and the mental and emotional focus that it's so healthy to get up under a heavy bar after a stressful day and let all that stress, all that muscle energy and all that mental energy be used for something productive.
That's right. That's right.
And that's another reason why we love to squat. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on and talk about
Yeah, we're getting fired up here.
why we love to squat. Yeah.
I can go squat now. You already squatted. I can go squat again. Yeah.
Yeah, I squatted 8s today.
Ooh,
3 sets of 8
I can't count that high.
with 305.
That's
That was fun. 3 sets of 8 with 305.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah,
That was fun.
I got to do some 5x5s here coming up. So
Sweet.
and I'll say this. I'll close out with this. Lots of you out there may be thinking, this sounds great, but I can't even squat. I can't even squat with my body weight. And guess what? That's a lot of people who come into our gym. That's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a ton of clients.
Yeah,
do
that's what we do as coaches.
Yeah.
And I think any good coach has many tricks in his bag or her bag to get you to squat to parallel. And there's lots of ways to do that. So if you need some help with this, go get a coach. Right?
Yeah,
It's like we
absolutely.
say, go get a coach to help you out, get you to squatting. Usually what we do is work you with just the body weight squat first, build up that strength, use the leg press, use all the tools that we have to get you strong enough to do a body weight squat. Then you can put a bar on your back and start getting strong from there. So if you're in the Fort Worth, Keller area, come look us up at Fort Worth Strength.
Absolutely.
Shoot us an email at info@40fit.com and we'll get you hooked up with a coach wherever you are.
Yeah.
And go squat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're using a strength program and you don't have the barbell lifts in your strength program, then you're missing the boat. You're missing an opportunity to use something that can be very, very easy to perform once learned, and you can do it almost anywhere in the world. It doesn't require a lot of specialized equipment,
Right.
and it's more applicable to any population. And it's more applicable to all populations. So, hey, if you want to connect with us and you want to learn more how to squat, then like Trent said, hook up with us at info@40fit.com. That's our email, or you can reach out to us via Instagram. And Trent is at Marmalade Cream.
That's right.
I am at Dr. Deaton. Our 40 Fit Radio is at 40 Fit Radio. And then you can also just reach out to us at Facebook, I guess, too, at the 40 Fit Nation.
40 Fit Nation.
So,
on
man,
Facebook.
we loved having you guys today. Go out there and squat. And next visit, we're going to talk about the press. Take care, guys. Later.